What's happening, Power Painter? This is Taylor Payton of taypayart.com and powerpainters.org coming to you today with another Power Painters tutorial. So this one was born when I read a comment by Phi Tam Nguyen. Phi basically wants to know how you can start using Photoshop to create some backgrounds, what's an easy process to go through for figuring out how stuff is going to be laid out, and if the background's for animation or concept art or any of that good stuff. And I just wanted to quickly address that because I've done a lot of background work, and I think that I have a couple awesome things that are going to help you guys make more succinct decisions when it comes to your backgrounds. A couple other quick notes I want to talk about. I am currently super pleased that the channel has been growing so quickly. We made like 500 more subscriptions in like less than 30 days, which is mind blowing to me. Before, this channel was growing so super slow, but when I try to be more consistent with my upload schedule, Monday and Thursday, I'm trying to get videos out. It's just been amazing, and the support means the world. I cannot wait to, keep increasing the production quality of the channel. Hopefully, get a camera that isn't my cell phone or my terrible laptop camera. I am so tired of that thing. Let's take a moment. Okay, I'm good again. Okay, so yeah, just thank you very much. It means the world. If you like, comment, subscribe, share the videos, sign up for the mailing list, or check out the Power Painter store. All of that helps to increase the amount of videos that gets put out, make sure the upload schedule stays consistent, and gets you awesome tutorials that will allow you to level up quickly and not make the mistakes that a lot of beginners make. But for now, let's boop over to Photoshop, check out the tutorial, and figure out how we can get some background painting going, because that is fun stuff and we're going to dive right in. Bloop. And so now we are inside Photoshop, and I'm going to take you and give you an overview of some of these very awesome concepts that if you keep them in mind and work with them continuously, you will have a much easier time doing backgrounds for your animation or backgrounds in general, or just even making art in general. So the first one is the focal point. That's where we want people to look, so everything will lead to this point typically in some way, shape, or form. You can have secondary focal points too, but that's a little more advanced. For now, just imagine like the point where everything will lead is the focal point. Next, we have large masses. So those are going to be the shapes that break up this picture plane right here, this white rectangle. Lastly, we have value structure, meaning that our values are basically the darkness or lightness of any given mass, and the structure of the values is going to denote how we break up those dark and light shapes on the picture plane and how we say what's in light and what's in shadow. So value structure is a pretty important thing. I go deeply into all of these things in my beginner drawing course, which you can find in the description box, but for now I'm going to give you a simple working understanding of each of them. So in order to do a background, like I said, for animation or otherwise, you need to first define our focal point. And that means we need to figure out where we want people to look and where we're going to lead them to. A good way to do this, I'm selecting the crop tool in Photoshop, and it's already set to rule of thirds at the top, which is good because that's the most simple one. And I'll just click the canvas, and you can see these four intersections right here are great focal points because they break up the picture plane in such a way that the eye will naturally kind of gravitate to one of these places. And the reason for that is because with each kind of breakup of the picture plane, intersections are easier to work with than the sort of blank spaces themselves. It's just kind of how our eyes and our perceptions naturally gravitate. So typically you want to lay a focal point on one of these bad boys right here. In this case, I think I'm going to place it. I'm not going to crop anything. I'm going to place it right here. So we'll say that this will be our focal point. And we want to make something out of it. We'll have to say, well, what is the idea of the focal point? What are we going to give people to focus on the picture plane? And the first thing that comes to mind, I guess, is maybe, say, a tower. So let's just sketch in a tower. Just the idea of a tower of some sort, because it's the easiest thing to kind of demonstrate this kind of stuff on. It's just some sort of multifaceted monolith hanging out on the rule of thirds. So this is our focal point, this area right here, and I've done a little bit of detailing and doodling and what have you. So this is where we want people to go and we want them to look. And right now there's not a lot of narrative or context. It's just going to be about the focal point. Next we got to think of, well, what are our large masses? What shapes are going to lead to that focal point? So let's say that the animation or what we're creating, what we want people to look at, is leading them to this point. So we're going to use the objects in the picture plane to lead them there. And in this case, we can use like clouds or something, like a cloud trail could lead people to the focal point. Just breaking up these large masses. There could be some sort of winding path to it as well. And the rest of it could just be down the side of the mountain or something. So on this side we have a bunch of large clouds, and maybe they cover up some of the other rocks and such as we're heading to this tower. And I'm just going to doodle those in. We'll have another secondary focal point maybe. No, that's too much for this tutorial. Let's keep it simple. See, it's hard to actually get yourself to go down to the lowest common denominator when you're used to doing things a little more complex. Anyway, so we have these large clouds that are leading us to the focal point, which is the tower. We have these rocks as well, and this winding road, which I'm going to wind a little more this way. And then we have this nice kind of open breathing space right here, which I'm going to keep mostly like that. I think I'll just add maybe one little set of clouds so that we don't fall completely off the picture plane onto the right. And I got some background noise and what have you, just other little breakups down here, because this will be like a really high up point and things will be lower value in the background for that structure. So I'm sketching them in even lighter. So you see I've already gone in and decided how some of this stuff is going to work before I've painted anything. This is just a drawing. So now that I have an idea of my composition, I can now go deeper and say, well, if I have this drawing, I know my focal point, I know my elements. Our next thing is, what is the value structure going to be? How is the value structure going to play out here? And in this case, I'll just start blocking it in. And here's a great process, because you mentioned you don't know what the process would be for painting something like this. I think a great way when you're first starting out with backgrounds is to keep it as simple as possible and just break up the shapes. So we've already kind of done this, and you got to decide, like, is this going to be in the light? Is this going to be in the shadow? Is it going to be super dark or super bright? Let's make it fairly dark and heavy so the eye really weighs in right here. And I'm just going to switch to the lasso tool, which is L on the keyboard, or you can go over here, it's right above the magic wand and the crop tool, and I'll just lasso this tower like this. Lasso the tower shape, I suppose. Pretty simple. And I've made a folder to put the drawing in so I can flip it on and off. This will be my painting layer. I'm painting under my drawing, and we'll just do a couple quick brush strokes. Take that little focal point dot away real quick. Yeah, there we go. Do a couple quick brush strokes. So the tower is sort of a dark tower, and you see I'm not going outside of my focal point at all. It's just stuck in that lasso selection. So we know our tower is going to be a fairly dark element, some shadow hitting it, maybe it's from the clouds. And then you branch out from there. I'm going to create another layer and try to do some of these rocks. I'm just lassoing these areas, which is going to create a really sharp edge, which specifically may not be the style you're going for, but you can always paint over your edges and soften them up later, so it's not a huge deal, and that's not 100% what the tutorial is about, so we'll just keep it to simple graphic breakups of shape. Here's the rocks. I'm just going to noodle these in here. The lasso tool is wonderful because we're not painting outside of anything. We're just painting in our selection where we want to. So right now our value structure is fairly dark. I'm leaving a couple points or patches of light just sort of arbitrarily. I'm not thinking too much about where my light's going to be landing, but I know most of it's going to be leading toward the tower. We have this nice big dark mass in the part leading up to our tower. Now let's start to figure out what color the background is going to be, or what the value structure of that will look like. I'm going to raise the value to about 80 and just do a quick fill. So that is Shift F5, and you can see that things got a little darker. So I've toned everything down. That gave it sort of a even more somber mood, and I'm gonna have to choose like how dark the clouds are going to be in relation to the sky. Let's say the sky is just sort of overcast gray, which means it's going to stay at that 8, and I'll lower it down to 6 for the clouds. So we'll just paint some quick shading onto those clouds. I don't need to use the lasso tool again for these, especially because having a super sharp edge on a cloud is not usually the best idea unless it's the style you're going for. So I'll just fill these in quickly, as in this is the value structure of our dark clouds. And you'll notice usually backgrounds have a gradient. The further you get toward the horizon line, they get a little brighter, so brighten this up down here. So the ground will be brighter, and then it'll pop our tower a little bit, give us a bit of a gradient in the sky. I can lower that to about 70 as well, so I can kind of paint it back and forth both ways. So we have just a super subtle gradient. Super subtle gradient for the sky. Having a little fun here. Okay, so got our clouds, got our tower and our road leading up to the tower, and this stuff back here, I'm just going to color pick this, whatever that is. Looks like it is pretty close to a 6.5. I'll just color some of this stuff in, or shade it since there's no color currently, so that whatever other little shapes are behind the tower can have a little more shading. So this is like the most basic background you can do. It's really good for storyboards and animatics because we have a pretty clear value separation. We have a mood going on now. If you want to actually go and paint this up and you needed a process for painting, we'd have to get a little more focused about where the light's coming from and start thinking, what part of the tower is getting hit and how are we going to render all these forms and materials. Things like getting the clouds to look like clouds and the rocks to look like rocks and the tower to have its own special material. So the value structure would inform all of that as well. I suppose we can do a fairly quick demonstration of that. Let's start with a color first. So since we have a grayscale essentially image, I'm going to go to selective color in the adjustment layer guide, which is right here. I'll just put it on top of everything. Then I'm going to select blacks, so the darkest stuff is going to get changed first. And I will start to play with it a little bit. I'm going to have a super warm underpainting, so this is the color that's just barely going to show through. Gets to be fairly orangey. Go to neutrals next, so now the more neutral tones are going to get affected. I usually pick a cooler neutral tone, so we'll go for sort of, that works. Finally we have our whites, so that's going to be the stuff that is the lightest, and yeah, I suppose a sort of bluish, orangish color scheme would work well for this. So that's the adjustment layer. I can flip that on and off. Again, you press this down here to create one of those, and it's good for starting colors. I'm going to paint opaquely on top of everything now, and if I was doing an actual animation, I wouldn't do this, just because I would want each of these on separate layers so I could move them around in Adobe After Effects or whatever. But since this is just a demonstration, I wanted to show you some quick painty things so that you can actually paint your background and not just separate the elements and figure out the composition, even though that stuff is super important and you should do that first most definitely. So for the lighting, I'll go in and rough in some light. We'll make a color dodge layer and set the brightness down to 0, saturation to 0. And I'm going to do another fill. This time I'll grab the paint bucket and you'll see nothing happened except the layer is actually completely black now. And color dodge only goes upward from white. It's going to add color and light to whatever I choose. So if I want a very sharp yellowish light to make itself known in the picture plane on a color dodge layer, I would just start dropping that in now at the parts that I want to be lit like that. So we'll kind of lead the eye around by having light show us where our focal point is. And that looks pretty good. So I'm just going to go and paint opaquely on top of that now. Now that I have an idea of where the light's coming from, we'll say that it's going to be falling in a line down toward the tower. So these rocks, I'll choose a cooler color. I'll just pick one of my custom brushes. What one's good for rocks? We'll use U. So at this point, I'm pretty much just going to paint opaquely on top of everything, color picking when I need to, and trying to keep the value structure in mind. We'll speed this process up. So what I pretty much end up doing at this point is going ×3 in terms of the speed multiplier in the video editing program. And you're seeing me paint 3 times faster than I actually do. I'm just taking that little idea of where the light's coming from, using Alt to color pick while using my brushes, and just painting on top of those shapes that I established earlier. Because everything has been laid in for me, it's time to do a little more free work. And that means just taking the composition I've already established and painting on top of it. You see I'm just color picking different areas and laying lighter or darker tones on top of them in order to define forms or give you the idea that these are some rocky shapes and a path leading up to it. A lot of the time I'll make mistakes and have to use Command Alt Z or Control Alt Z, because I'll try something really quick just to see if it works and it usually doesn't. So the first time I get rid of it and then I try it again and then somehow it magically works. I'm kidding. It's really just trial and error in a lot of cases though. And you notice I zoomed out pretty far because I knew this was going to be a speed painting. If I wanted to get in and do some nitty-gritty details, that would be later after I've established all this stuff. So I'm basically just painting up to the stuff that is going to hit the focal point, painting over my lines because I've already established my cloud shapes, and getting it to feel more like a painting than a drawing. I could have just switched the line layer off, but I figured this was going to be a quick paint anyway. You see me going in down there for the background and painting back and forth, which is just taking some of the atmospheric values from below the mountain and pulling them up into the mountain, creating atmospheric perspective, which is really helpful when painting backgrounds. 90% of what I'm doing though is just color picking with Alt and painting over stuff using the color I picked, which is a darker or a lighter tone. And this process becomes incredibly natural the more you do it. Every artist I know who uses Photoshop just uses Alt to color pick or picks their color with the color picker tool and then just keeps painting. You will develop a very fast workflow eventually, but don't worry about speed at this point. Just get used to color picking and painting, because that's what's going to be a large part of the process. As far as actually painting the background too, I'm switching some of the shapes up, but you notice my focal stuff usually stays the same. Maybe some of the stuff leading up to it is getting changed, but we're just focusing on that large different colored rock, which is not that interesting as an actual focal point. However, for the purposes of just showing you how to paint something, I think that it serves its purpose. So I'm leaving the background layers, I'm sorry, the background values fairly bright or mid-tone, and then the dark stuff is all where my focal point lies, and so I'm creating a sense of space and depth using that value structure, and that's pretty much the painting right there. This is what I ended up with after about 16 more minutes of painting. So yeah, that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk about, how to paint and draw a background if you're a beginner. This is a very simple composition, and it allows you to see how you can discern a focal point, your large masses, and how those relate to the value scale that you establish, so you can parse light and dark and brightness and shadow and all that good stuff. If you want to know more about the value scale or those other fundamentals I talked about, please feel free to check out the beginner drawing course. Link is in the description box. There is an 8-week version currently available, and there will be a 12-week version available on February 2nd, but that still is available for pre-order if you wanted to acquire that. So that has been the tutorial. If you have any questions, leave those in the description box for me, and I will try to address them in future tutorials. If you would like, share, and subscribe, that helps me a ton. It allows me to grow the channel and hopefully soon make a full-time living off of this. But even if not, I'm still having a great time making this stuff for you guys. Thanks for watching. Happy creating. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Take care, Power Painter.